Well, hello everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. This webinar, Underfunding Reserves, Keep Calm and Be Smart, is designed to help you understand what underfunding is, how it happens, and most importantly, I'll share some tips on strengthening reserve funding at your association. For 27 years, we've been helping our clients prepare for the future, and in my preparations for this webinar today, I was thinking, what do I know and how can I share something that will help you? So with that in mind, in part one, I'll tell you about the experience we have to show you that underfunding is not just a feeling. It's something that can be measured at your association and every association. And then I'll show you how many associations across the USA are underfunded so you can see how your association compares to others. Then I'll move into discussing, reviewing the reasons, or you may call them excuses or misconceptions, that get associations into their underfunded state, clarifying the consequences of being underfunded. And also in this section, I'll remind you of the business judgment rule, which is the standard that boards are held to when they make decisions like reserve budget decisions. And then finally, I'll conclude with what you as a board member or manager can do about it. I want to save you money. I want home values in your association maximized, and I want your association free from unsettling surprises. I can't do it for you, but I can set you up for success and get you pointed in the right direction. That's what I'll be able to leave you with at the end of our session today. Now, I'll be moving pretty quickly through today's material, but no worries. We're recording today's session, so you'll be able to watch it again from our website if you so choose, or spread the word and have others watch it. In addition, we'll email an outline to everyone who fills out our brief survey at the end of today's presentation. I enjoy doing these live webinars. It's even better when I have a live audience right in front of me, but next best thing is to get feedback from you across the internet. So to make sure you're involved and keeping your attention, look in the webinar control panel, which looks like the image in the slide, and look for the icon that looks like a hand. Clicking that will electronically raise your hand. So let's test that out right now. Get you going. Grab your mouse and click on the hands raised icon to show me that you're ready to get going on this presentation. Very good. I see hands coming up. There they are. Okay. I'm going to click to set everyone's hands down. And, oh, by the way, one more thing. The arrow now points to a little dialog box. That's where you should type in a question if you ever a thought comes to mind and you have a question for me. That's where page is going to draw from when we do the Q&A time. We have a couple of Q&A times during the session and then another one at the end. So we get to the content here. How can you measure your reserve fund's health? And how can you get beyond the feelings so you can know and compare? Well, the first thing is to understand that there are national reserve study standards. All the information you need to measure your reserve fund strength should be in your current reserve study if it was prepared according to National Reserve Study standards. These standards have been in place since 1998, which is 16 years ago. So the things I go through today are not just association reserves principles, although of course we use them here. They're National Reserve Study standards. Every time I show an important National Reserve Study standards concept, you'll see this blue ribbon on the screen. And why is this important? Because every reserve study, according to National Reserve Study standards, has three results: the component list, a computation of reserve fund strength, and a calculation of the contribution rate necessary to achieve the association's funding objective. The component list is the foundation of the reserve study. The reserve fund strength and funding plan calculations are based on it. So the component list defines the scope and schedule of your reserve expenses, and therefore it needs to be solid so those other computations, the reserve fund strength and contributions, can be reliable. And because the component list is the foundation, it's important to make sure all the right components are included, and on the contrary, make sure all the wrong components don't appear. But how do we do this? How does anyone know which projects should and shouldn't be funded through reserves? Well, we go right back to National Reserve Study Standards. Fortunately, there's a reliable 4-part test found in National Reserve Study Standards. You see it on your screen. We use this. We encourage the client to use this 4-part test when they review the reserve study, and we encourage the manager to review the component list in light of this 4-part test. And when all 3 of those parties are using the same sifting mechanism, your association is likely to have a stable and reliable reserve component list that's going to help you accurately plan for the future and, for the purposes of this webinar, calculate your reserve fund strength. Projects that are appropriate for reserve funding are those that pass all 4 elements of this test. They're a common area maintenance responsibility, they're life limited, they have a predictable remaining useful life, and they're above a minimum threshold cost of significance. They need to pass all those 4 tests, and if they do so, they should appear in your reserve study. And so you'll develop a reserve component list that for your association will look something like this. It's a list of projects, their useful life cycle in years, their remaining useful life cycle in years, and remember, this is for the projected year. A December 31st property that's doing their reserve study this summer, that should be their remaining useful life in 2015. Here it's, where are we at? March of 2014. So if you're doing this summer for the classic December 31st fiscal year property, you're doing it in advance of your budget this fall that you'll use in 2015. And lastly, there will be a current estimated repair or replacement cost, and again, that's estimated 2014 or 2015 dollars. So knowing that, let's move on to the content of today's webinar, how reserve fund strength is calculated and measured. It's described by a term called percent funded. Now, percent funded is just a balance between how much your common area components have deteriorated and how much you've collected in reserves. It's a moving comparison that you make each year because your components in reserve fund both change each year. Percent funded is the way an association can easily see if their reserves have kept pace with ongoing deterioration. 100% funded means the reserves have kept pace. They're in balance with the current value of reserve component deterioration. Associations over 100% funded have more cash than deterioration, and like in the picture here, associations where there's more deterioration than cash are under 100% funded. The calculated value of this deterioration that I speak about is called the fully funded balance. It's calculated for each component where you multiply the fractional age, like 5 years used up out of a 10-year useful life, giving you half used up, times its current replacement cost. So as the fractional age grows, as it gets more and more used up, that value, that calculated value of deterioration grows. And so it looks like this when you do the fully funded balance calculations for your component list. See how, let's look at the first component. See how for that first component the remaining useful life is 0, showing that the component has been fully used up, so it's 100% used up, so its fully funded balance, its deteriorated value, is the value of the component, or $4,600. And you do this same calculation for all your reserve components and add up to the total at the bottom. So this year, this association's reserve component deterioration, their fully funded balance, is a little over $154,000. And each year, you can do those same calculations to be able to create your percent funded, which is your comparison between your current fully funded balance as of the first day of the fiscal year, and your actual reserve balance, again, as of the first day of your fiscal year. That's how you get percent funded and just expressed as a percentage. Now it's important because we can look at that information. Among our clients, we track the ones that need special assessments and the ones that don't. And you can see here on your screen data from about 30,000 of our completed reserve studies. And you can see a very strong trend. You can notice that the frequency of special assessments, which is the vertical scale, special assessment risk, grows dramatically as an association's percent funded approaches zero, meaning approaches the left side of your screen. In other words, the less reserve cash, relatively speaking, your association has on hand, the greater chance that it will need a special assessment to provide for the needs of the association, because the cash just plain doesn't exist. It's a very, as you can see, it's a very clear relationship. Significantly underfunded means significant risk of special assessment. And notice how we've grouped the data into three ranges. The red weak zone is high risk of special assessment. That's those associations 0 to 30% funded. The middle yellow range is medium risk of special assessment. That's 30% funded to 70% funded. And above 70% funded is the low risk range, strong reserves, and they have a low risk of special assessment, very close to zero. And as some or many of you may have heard or read, 70% of associations are moderately or significantly underfunded. That information came from our firm from that same data set of 30,000 associations. This is not a feeling, it's the numbers that we've been able to measure. So the question is, where does your association fit in? We find that about 30% of associations across the country are in that severely underfunded red category. About 40%, the largest grouping, is in the moderately underfunded range, that yellow zone, and about 30% are in the green well-funded category. So that means that 70% of associations are underfunded. But remember, only about 30% are in that severely underfunded range. So let me step back for a moment before we move on, actually, and check with Paige. Any questions so far from our audience on how we calculated if an association is underfunded, or any reserve component questions?
Yes, Robert, there is one. What do you do about code changes that changed, sometimes significantly, the projected cost of a project?
Great question. What you saw in the reserve component list a couple of slides ago is the current estimated cost. Now, hopefully the association is doing regular reserve study updates, so as soon as you know the code has changed and that roof or asphalt or fence is going to have to be different and going to be more expensive, hopefully you've incorporated it into your reserve study and you've adjusted your funding. That's the magic there. Hopefully you saw that higher cost coming and had at least a few years of adjusted higher reserve contributions to help the association meet that higher cost. Bottom line is you do the project and you always use your best information and making estimates for the next cycle around. Anything else?
Nope, you covered it.
Great. Okay. All right. Everyone grab your mouse and give me another hands raised if you're ready to move on to this next section. Hands raised for moving on. Excellent. Okay. Thank you all. Here we go. So how does this happen? Why do boards let their associations get into this underfunded situation? And in real numbers, why are 30% successful in preparing their associations to take care of ongoing deterioration? And why are those 70% failing to collect enough money from their members to care for the common areas? Well, we learn a few things, and I'd like to share with you some both problems, excuses, and filter in some suggested solutions. First is, some associations often just plain don't have a good system for collecting the income that's been budgeted. Often when there's a shortage of income, one of the first things sacrificed is reserve contributions. So if you're not collecting your homeowner assessments, your reserve contributions are often going to be falling short. If this is the case at your association with 60-day delinquencies approaching or exceeding the 10% range, you've got a collections problem. It's best, most healthy associations are in the 0 to 5% range. So how do you reduce your delinquencies? Well, one thing is to get creative. Consider limiting privileges only to owners in good standing, or develop lease addendums that give the association the right to collect rent directly from renters of those delinquent units. That preserves the association's income stream. And that leads me to the second point. You're probably going to need to consult with an attorney. It's going to cost a little bit of money to get some help on this. Find out what things are rights, which are the things that can't be denied, and which things are privileges that can be made available only to the owners in good standing. So enlist the help of a collection specialist. It may be that same attorney, or it may be another firm. Get professional assistance on this important problem. And create a collection policy. Clearly communicate, maybe your newsletter, maybe your website, what the consequences are of not paying, and show your resolve. Your income stream is the lifeblood of the association. The second common reason for getting into an underfunded situation is when the board is in a state of denial. This is when the association doesn't have a current reserve study, and the key here is they don't want to know the reserve needs of the association. They're pretending it's just not happening. And the problem with that is wishful thinking is not a plan. So a solution starts by taking an honest look at the association's current situation and assembling the facts. Every successful journey starts with a plan. You're not going to get to the solution that you want if you don't know where you are and where you're going. And a reserve study is an association's plan to get successfully to the future. Again, don't think you have to do it yourself. While there's some great free or low-cost annual update tools for do-it-yourselfers, when you need professional help, consult a reserve specialist. A third reason for underfunding is just plain ignoring logic and operating based on emotions. You can, as I've indicated, successfully identify the major expenses that are deteriorating. You can measure your association's level of preparedness, and you can create a fair reserve funding plan where everyone pays their fair share. There's no excuse for just operating based on emotion and not the facts of the situation. But even though it's best to operate on the facts, all reserve funding decisions are made by people, so you have to understand the human factor. And here's the tip. Don't let the human factor be a disadvantage. Use it to your advantage. And that starts by appreciating the difference between fear and hope. People fear the future when it's unknown or uncertain. On the other hand, people anticipate and look forward to the future when it's been painted in an attractive light. That's because they have hope. They're looking forward to it. Now here, with respect to reserves, unfortunately people tend to fear reserve expenses. And remember, for people in a state of fear, they avoid the future and focus almost entirely on the here and now. So stop talking about reserves in future terms. People are just going to shut down. Keep a discussion about reserves to the present. Totally avoid the future. It's a strong emotional trigger that is in your best interests to avoid. Every association does itself a disservice when it describes reserve contributions as for a future event, like when you say we're saving for a rainy day or saving for a future roof replacement. Talking about contributions for a future event is going to be an unsuccessful strategy. You're going to turn people off, and you're unlikely to get a majority support. And just think, how many times have you heard someone say they don't want to make reserve contributions for a roof because they're not going to be here in 10 years when they need to replace it? So because of those strong emotional triggers, it's always going to be difficult to get owners to buy into funding future expenses. So don't go there. Describe reserve contributions accurately at every opportunity as offsetting the ongoing current cost of deterioration at the association. This may be a new habit that you need to pick up. Call them current costs. You'll find people much more inclined to pay their fair share, little by little, along the way, on a month-to-month basis. Current owners are using things up. Current owners should pay their fair share. It's a lot easier discussion to have and a lot easier argument to make. Let the future take care of itself and totally avoid those emotions that come with fear and uncertainty about future events. Just deal with the present. And we also hear people saying we can't afford it. The problem with this reason, or I call it an excuse, is that it's just plain wrong. Too many board members and managers think that reserve contributions are optional, things that they can decide they can live without, like maybe a sports car or a speedboat. But reserve expenses are not discretionary. The expenses always occur. The roof is going to fail, the paint is going to fade, that's just the way it is. The only question is if contributions have been keeping up with the deterioration. Someone is always going to be faced with that bill. And in the case of severely underfunded associations, that somebody is a set of owners who live there when the special assessment is passed. And remember, those somebodies who are forced to pay more than their fair share are never happy. Reason number 5 has to do with ignoring responsibility that you have as a board member or manager. It's the board's fundamental responsibility to care for the assets of the association, and it's the manager's role to guide them along that path. And like expenses, responsibility is not optional. Those responsibilities are often laid out clearly in the association's governing documents, and in some states it's even written into corporate code governing the behavior of corporate officers. Owners rely on the board to take care of the association's common areas, preserving home value. And in running associations, the boards, guided and counseled by managers, need to make decisions based on what's right, and popular should have nothing to do with it. And that takes me to the next point. As corporate officers with shareholders in the corporation relying on their responsible actions, board members have real responsibilities and significant liability exposure. Fortunately, there's a concept known as the business judgment rule that protects board members from personal liability in their efforts to run the association if, and here's the key word, if they've made decisions that pass this 3-part test. Number 1, if they've acted within their power, which is typically defined by governing documents and state law. They've acted after reasonable inquiry because board members can't be expected to know everything, and so they have the authority and encouragement to reach out for wise counsel. And third, they need to act in the best interest of the association, not putting their own interests first. And with respect to reserves, this means raising reserve contributions if the facts show they need to be raised, not based on what the boards just feel about it or like. And along the lines of responsibility, keep in mind that accidents are accidental. D&O insurance pays for the defense of accidents that occur when boards are executing their ongoing daily duties. If a board willfully ignores their responsibility to care for the assets of the corporation, that's not an accident. That's a willful event. No D&O coverage. I've had a number of association attorneys that I speak with suggest that if their firm wasn't committed to serving associations, it'd be easy to flip sides and successfully represent homeowners who wish to sue board members at underfunded associations. Responsibility is something that boards and managers need to take seriously. So let me take another quick break here. Did I miss anything summarizing why underfunding occurs? Any comments, Paige, or questions from our audience here?
Just one quick question, Robert. What if we have a lot of foreclosures at our association?
Very good. Foreclosures at an association ends up being something I put into the category of a collections problem, and that's something that you address with your collections team, whether it be a collections company, an attorney, and hopefully something that you can eventually resolve by making the association attractive to new owners who will be paying the ongoing homeowner assessment. So it's a combination, having a strong collections team at your disposal and making the association attractive for new owners that will become paying owners. Okay, let me move on. Let's spend a few moments reinforcing what happens when that happens. Now, I'm not sure, based on what we see, that managers and board members fully appreciate all the bad things that are associated with underfunding. I think if they knew all these bad things, there'd be more reluctance to go down this path. So first, issue of deferred maintenance. Boards who fail to spend money where and when it needs to be spent allow problems to grow in size and cost. The problem with this is that when thinking it's someone else's problem or maybe the expense will go away, that thinking is dead wrong. Deferred projects don't go away. They just get more expensive, and often we find that that more is often 4 to 10 times as much. You look at this picture, for example. Instead of simply doing some inexpensive painting, now the association needs to do an expensive window frame complete replacement. That deferred painting project just got very expensive. And the need for special assessments or loans, another consequence of underfunding. Special assessments and loans are needed when the association needs to quickly make up for years of failing to budget the right amount, a little bit at a time, all along the way. And the problem with special assessments and loans is that they take time and they're uncertain. You don't know if the owners will pass a special assessment, and you don't know if the bank will approve the loan. And if and when a special assessment passes, it's inherently unfair. Special assessments collect the same amount of money from new owners as they do long-term owners. And in the case of a loan, it burdens future owners not only with the high cost of paying for that past deterioration, it adds interest payments. And let me show you what that looks like. It's incredible, actually. Here's a $250,000 roof project that the roof lasted 15 years. If the association made regular budgeted reserve contributions over those 15 years, assuming only 1% interest earnings, the owners would have been able to pay for that roof project with only $232,000 worth of contributions. That's a pretty healthy savings and a great way to buy a $250,000 roof. Special assessment is clearly money in, money out. Wait till the last minute, special assess the owners, collect $250,000, and hand that right over to the roofer. But if the association takes out a loan and current terms are roughly, as I called around, 7 years and 7% interest, that loan is going to cost the homeowners over $320,000. So clearly, a loan is a very expensive way to pay for reserve projects. The least expensive and fairest way to pay for reserve projects is ongoing budgeted contributions. So if owners are saying, I want the cheapest way to do this is ongoing budgeted contributions. That's just the answer. That's what the numbers say, and that's just the right answer. Another key consequence of deferred maintenance associated with underfunding reserves is lower property values. Actually, this may be one of the most expensive ways that owners deal with underfunded reserves. Take a look here. What do you think real estate agents say about this association? What buyer walking up to this association is going to make a strong offer for one of these units? And as I look at this place, I have every expectation that in addition to the sales price being low, I bet the homeowner dues are one of the lowest ones in the neighborhood also. It looks to me like they just don't have enough money to do anything. And in addition to having depressed home values from lousy curb appeal, it's another thing to limit the pool of potential buyers, so you have less people even competing to buy a home there. And that's what happens when Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, and FHA won't get involved in backing loans for prospective buyers. These organizations are looking for a real simple 10% test. That's that the association is moving at least 10% of their budget towards reserves on an ongoing basis. Pretty simple. Only problem is it doesn't mean much. Most associations, in our experience, need 15 to 40% of their total budget going towards reserves to offset ongoing deterioration. So while 10% will open up the mortgage funding pool, it's not a number that will assure you of adequate reserves. And then liability. The last consequence, or last category regarding underfunding reserves is board member liability exposure. As I said before, homeowners are relying on the board to take care of the association. And unless board members can demonstrate that they're acting according to the business judgment rule, and when I say that, I get my 3 fingers out, in their area of power and responsibility, after making reasonable inquiry, which means gathering the facts, and number 3, acting in the best interest of the association, owners can easily sue. And remember, board members will not be defended by their D&O insurance if their problems were created by their own willful actions. So, no surprise, there are some very real and significant consequences to underfunding reserves. Deferred maintenance, need for expensive special assessments and loans, lower property values, and liability exposure. Nothing good on this list. The thing they all have in common is that they are expensive. They all cost the association money, they cost the owners money, or they cost board members money. That's why it's important to give reserve planning the annual attention it deserves. Underfunding is expensive. There's no two ways about it. Okay, as I turn the corner to the final stretch, just one last reminder that if you have questions, type them into the dialog box. I'm sure Paige is already organizing them for the Q&A session at the end. So, we come here, what to do. Now that we know how to measure underfunding, we know how many associations are underfunded, how associations get into that problem situation, and what the consequences and costs are. What's my recommendation? What can you actually do about this? And you may think, wow, sometimes success seems like a long ways away. It's way up there, maybe unattainable. But typically, that's not the case. I don't want any giving up. Let me show you how it can be done. It starts out with some measurable steps. Step 1 is to deal with the truth. Get the facts, meaning get a reserve study. Start discussing the numbers, not just irresponsible feelings of surrender or that it's someone else's problem or you got enough other things to deal with. Punch through those lousy excuses. Come to grips with the real costs of underfunding and discuss it at your association in terms of ongoing current deterioration and set board policy that everyone is going to start paying their fair share along the way. And the second step is to avoid those cash flow problems that cause the deferred maintenance, special assessments, and those loans. And that happens by actually budgeting so that everyone's paying their fair share. Make those budgeted change. Make appropriate sized contributions. Getting financially healthy is going to take time, but you've got to start. And then finally, you get success when you begin to see the association saving money, where the association can avoid those high costs of deferred maintenance and the surprises that tend to just drain your reserve budget. And you'll find that in just a few years, your association can be one of the 30% that have strong reserves. The great thing is that you get to decide. Those small changes accumulated over the years can change the course of your association's future. So make reasonable steps of improvement each budget year. My job and my ability is to share what I've learned and point you in the right direction. It's up to you to make the minor changes that over the years are going to change the course of your association. And just as a reminder, you will be able to mark your progress along the way. It may be a long ways to a strong reserve-funded position, but you can mark your progress. You can see yourself going from 28% to 33% to 36%, etc., along the way. It's very encouraging. And that's the end of my prepared material for today. It is going to be a multi-year journey. It's a matter of constant diligence, and we've got plenty of resources for this multi-year journey towards your association's future on our website, and that's www.reservestudy.com. There you'll find some links, some helpful links. Our Learning Center is where you're going to find our library, some helpful downloads, National Reserve Study standards, and recordings of prior webinars. We're here at Association Reserves to help save you money, help you avoid surprises, help you get the answers you need, and guide you successfully towards that future. Now, kind of by definition, many of you attending our webinar today are familiar with Association Reserves. But for those of you who are not, if at any time you need a proposal, just click the Request a Proposal link that you see on the right side of the page. And all you need to do is just answer a few questions there. And if you learned about our webinar today through a referral and you want to get your own reserve study hints, tips, and future webinar announcements, just click the link again on the right to sign up for our email list. So at this time, I'd like to thank you for joining us. And with the time remaining, Paige is going to coordinate the Q&A session with the questions that you've typed in. Paige, I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Robert. As I mentioned before, you can type your questions into the question box at the bottom of your control panel. Okay, Robert, our first question from Teresa. Our board has used our reserve funds for other items not included in the reserve fund instead of operation maintenance expense. Is there a danger in overusing reserve funds?
Absolutely. Reserve funds are dedicated towards reserve projects. There's two levels of problems here. One is that you're draining the reserve fund for the purpose it was created, and the second is reserves are funds protected from taxation. They're not considered profit. They're considered funds set aside, offsetting ongoing deterioration. And once you start using the reserve fund as kind of a kitty, then there is danger that the IRS can sense that it is retained earnings, which means profit, which means a possibility of being taxed. So there's a couple of problems with that. Keep your reserve fund for use only on reserve projects.
Okay, great. Next question is from Matt. I heard recently that the FHA minimum went from 10% to 18% back in October. Is this true?
Not true. It's still at 10%.
Okay, great. Next question is from Carol. Why should we do a reserve study if it's not required in our state?
Well, I like that. Hopefully I've been able to describe the benefits of a reserve study. Reserve study is to provide you with those three answers: an understanding of what you're reserving for, the component list, an evaluation of reserve fund strength, kind of a guidepost along the way, and a window on your risk of a special assessment, and the third is for a recommended reserve contribution rate. That's why you do a reserve study. Some states have enacted laws that require reserve funding, reserve disclosures, or reserve studies, but you do it because you need to, not because the state says so.
Great. Next question is from Matt. Can you speak to spending money from reserves? Is there an industry standard or best practice of how you pull money out of reserves?
Good question. We're getting into some of the kind of technicalities of daily operation, but in general, associations spend money from their checking account. Typically, the way they manage a reserve project is the board authorizes a transfer of cash from reserves to the checking account for a particular purpose, and then those funds are expended towards a particular project. In that example I used earlier of a $250,000 roof project, they may transfer $250,000 from savings, the reserve savings, to checking, and then from checking write possibly a series of 5 $50,000 checks to the roofer as progress payments toward the completed project. But payments come from operating after they've been transferred from reserves.
Next question is from Connie. Is there a general rule regarding who pays the deductible when a claim is filed for a homeowner, the homeowner or the board?
Wow, Paige, I'm going to make an assumption on that. I'm going to assume that someone damaged the rec room or broke something in the exercise room, and so there's an insurance claim. If they can trace it to Jimmy Johnson in unit number 13, then that's the responsible party. That person should pay the deductible. I can't think of a reason why the board should pay the deductible. I can understand the association paying the deductible if they can't identify a party who is to blame for that claim.
Okay, we have time for one last question, and as a reminder, if we did not get to your question, we will contact you by email to answer your question after the webinar. Okay, Robert, last question. Can you clarify how a project is defined as a reserve project?
Certainly. Wow, I'd have to go way back in the slides here, but there's that National Reserve Study Standard 4-part test, and to go through it, to be considered for reserve funding, to be appropriate for reserve funding, it needs to be a common area maintenance responsibility, it needs to be life limited, it needs to have a predictable remaining useful life, and it needs to have a replacement cost that's significant to the association. And that often means above a 0.5% or around 1% of the association's total budget. Often it's a number like that. Those are the kind of projects that should be appearing in your reserve study and should be the basis for your reserve fund strength and reserve funding calculations.
Great, thank you, Robert. That concludes our webinar. If anyone is interested in a recorded version of this or any other webinar, you can find them on the Association Reserves website, www.reservestudy.com. If you would like to receive our monthly newsletters or receive announcements of future webinars, please visit our website and select the Join Our Mailing List icon. As you exit this webinar, a survey will display. If you could help us out by completing the survey, we'll be happy to email you an outline of the key points Robert addressed today. I want to thank you all for attending. If you have any questions or if there's any way we can be of service to you, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you again. Goodbye.